Today's virtual class is on performance management. When we talk about performance management, or when a lot of people talk about performance management, they're often really just talking about performance evaluation. Actually, performance evaluation goes way beyond that. Before we get into it very much, and we are going to go through the 4 steps to some degree, and I'll tell you just to sort of include a little bit of detail that's certainly not in the book, and examples perhaps. I do want to review a couple of prior concepts, only one of which is really that closely related to this topic. First of all, we're going to talk about about looking on the right of this slide, the right side of this slide. These are the 3 concepts sort of associated with the self-determination theory of motivation, which we talked about before, and also the movie Drive, what really motivates us, which I think is able to summarize a lot of recent research in motivation, work motivation, very effectively. Mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Relatedness, to some of us, sort of that's kind of the same thing. There are some people that are more interested in relatedness than others. Some people really, if they're happy if they're doing something useful, and maybe it doesn't really matter to them, the sort of the connection with people at work. But to some extent, it's sort of always there. There are famous stories, which I know I'll talk about at least once in class, about Steve Wozniak and his last job before Apple, where he felt the need for relatedness, but only in small doses, or the need for connecting with people, but only in small doses. But know that stuff, and the examples that they used in the video. You remember they talked about the Federal Reserve research and a couple of other things. And I think it's a very sort of almost riveting, certainly a very compelling video. I think the style using that kind of video of development on the whiteboard is really very effective. Now I'm going to talk about the stuff on the left here. And we haven't talked about this at any great length before, but these are words that people mix up. People that are studying organizational behavior mix these words up often enough, or in pairs, they mix them up. And my students are not going to mix them up. Okay? Profit sharing is pretty much what it sounds like. When a company, when a firm performs above its expectations, then that excess profit, or sometimes all profit, is shared by the employees. And that's a really tried and, well, I'll say tried and true, but a really very well established form of pay, compensating above pay. The gain sharing is a little bit different, and you saw an example of that in a video that you were supposed to have watched, where the gentleman Sidney Harmon was talking about what they use in some of their organizations. He's the founder of Harman Kardon, which is a major sound corporation, and he's a very interesting guy. He died a couple of years ago in his 90s. This was made not too long before he died, just a few years before he died. And this is a guy that started the company, I believe, in the late 40s or early 50s. It became a mammoth, at the time, stereo equipment, audio equipment, and mainly speaker, I guess, company. He sold it to a large firm. They ran it, I guess, not much to his liking, and he ended up buying it back and building it up again. After that, he went into a lot of other ventures. He sold the company again. When he was in his 80s, he went back to school and got a PhD in psychology. And then in his 90s, he bought Newsweek magazine and saved it from extinction. By connecting it with, by merging it with the Daily Beast. So he's, if you're familiar with Newsweek, it was a main competitor at the time, and then really faded largely because of the enormous amount of debt that they had. And in fact, when he bought the magazine, he bought it for $1. But he took on tens of millions of dollars of debt as part of the purchase. So that's Sidney Harmon, a real folk hero to me. And so what he talks about in that video, when he says, this is the way we get people to perform, or we help encourage people to perform, that's what he's talking about. Now, work sharing and job sharing, I've heard people mix these up all the time. Okay, Work sharing is a process where, for example, if a company is faced with cutbacks, let's say they've lost. There's an example we'll see later in the term of a company that lost 20% of their business through no fault of their own. Their main client went out of business because of its own mismanagement. You'll see much more about the story when we talk about corporate culture. But this company came back and the employees all agreed. They said, well, look, and it's work sharing whether they agree or not. But the employees all agreed. Said, well, instead of laying off a fifth of the workforce, and then when we build up our business again, having to all work lots of overtime, maybe against our will, what we've decided, and actually one or two people, one of them said, she wanted to stay home with her kids, another one wanted to go back to school, so they left, got signed a small buyout and left voluntarily, and the other people all took 80% of their pay and worked 80% of the time, I guess 1 day off a week, until the company built up again to its what they considered its appropriate level of revenue. So that's work sharing. Job sharing, on the other hand, which is sometimes inaccurately called work sharing, job sharing is when two people share what was traditionally or what is considered normally to be a single full-time job. So that one of them maybe work Monday, Tuesday, half of Wednesday. The other one's perhaps, the rest of the week. There's other ways you can do it, mornings and afternoons. There are some costs associated with it. Certainly benefits, maybe not, depending on how it's structured in your organization. When I was working as a supervisor in a related unit, somebody told me that this is many years ago, decades ago. So, well, we're going to do. My boss said we're going to do this with the other unit. We've got these two people. They both want to spend time with their kids, and we're going to split the job. And one of them was in the job, and I knew she was really good. The other one I didn't know, and I said, well, I certainly have doubts, but obviously the boss seemed to know what he was talking about, and I'll tell you that turned out to be a really superior solution. They continued with that process for years and years, and it really worked well for them, and it worked well for our organization. And one of the big advantages was, sometimes if your kid is sick or if you have some special event that you have to deal with, you take a day off or half a day off. They would often switch. Instead, we ended up with less absent time for that position than we had when it was held by one person alone. And in fact, the two people got to be, they didn't become close friends, but they got to be very well acquainted with each other and understood how they worked. And there was a small time each week. I think it was Wednesday afternoon. I don't remember now. There was a small period each week, a short period where they both were together in the office, so that if there was anything that had to be done, because it was a highly professional kind of a job. It was really there was a lot of public contact, but it was also a very technical computer job, and they were a computer systems job, and they worked it out really well. It was a very successful solution. So understand what we mean by those 4 words. I will use them over and over again throughout the term or the rest of the term, and you really do need to know them. Mastery, autonomy, and purpose. I'll probably refer to that again too. I'll ask you a little question. The method of motivation Sidney Harmon discusses may be referred to as, now you should have watched this, whether you saw it in class or watched it on your own. It's on Blackboard. But you should know the answer to this, okay? Especially because I just told you. But let's see if you got it right. Yes, it's gain sharing. All right, because that's what they did was, and he was very proud of the fact that he got this system to work like this in a very strictly unionized shop, where a lot of these pay based on performance kinds of plans are subject to a lot of scrutiny and sometimes a lot of negotiation, and they were able to be successful at it. When he talked about the differences between running a plant he had plants in Indiana, California, and a lot of other places, including most of the world, I guess. But that was how he made it successful. Now we're going to move on to the actual topic that we were looking at for today. The performance process. Let me move back a little bit. What we mean by the performance management process, there's a definition here. Again, it's more than more than a simple sort of performance appraisal, and that's really what I want to make clear to you. That don't just liken it to that, because that's what a lot of organizations and a lot of managers do, and it's not really taking advantage of the whole process. It's a 4-stage process. We're going to for a cycle and we're going to go over this in each stage with a little bit of detail. Doing so effectively, having effective performance management brings greater employee engagement. The organization should perform better, and again, sometimes managers who manage this process well can often generate really exceptional results, and obviously that's what that's what you're aiming for. The uses of it. When we talk about making employee-related decisions, again, pay raises, promotions, sometimes layoffs, or and especially if you do have to lay someone off and you've had a good, consistent performance management process, then you'll reduce the chances, or even eliminate, in most cases, the chances of any kind of a successful wrongful dismissal lawsuit, because these things do happen. Once somebody gets fired, they start saying, well, this wasn't because of my performance, it was because of some other reason. And generally, if you've documented what you've done, and again, that's not the real purpose of this, though. The purpose the best purposes of this is again to make the kind of decisions to deploy people in the right kinds of jobs and make them successful, to deploy them in a way that they can be successful. Guiding employee development. What we're talking about here is giving the employee, what he or she needs to be successful. Often that involves training and development. The difference between training and development is training is usually associated with a specific job, either the one you have or the one that you're moving toward, whereas development is more general. And we'll talk about that a lot later on, especially very late in the term. I can think of an example of that where we had there was a person where I was working who was put in charge of a computer network. Person had really good skills in a lot of other areas. That was not something where he was really capable, and we sent him to training for probably only about a week, and when he came back, he was successful. He had a successful career, and he's probably still managing networks or computer privacy policies, very successfully in a much larger organization now. So we took somebody that analyzing that kind of training need and being successful with it can really make a difference in your company's performance and even in somebody's life. And now sending strong signals to employees. Basically, they need to know this sounds more assertive or more aversive than it needs to. What we're really talking about is making sure they know what they have to do in order to advance their careers, in order to make the organization successful. That aspect of communication is really central here. The kinds of things that go wrong. The main thing that goes wrong is, as I said, when managers just treat this as, well, I got to do your performance evaluation next week. Come to my office for an hour and we'll do it. And it's not part of a really integrated, continuous process. And that's really the problem. It's not just a chore that involves checking some boxes and handing them in and saying, well, this is what we have to do. We had to evaluate your performance in all these different areas, and that's really not what we're talking about. Secondly, many people, many of the real experts will argue that you need to use measures that are valid, that are useful, that have been proved to not only valid in the sense that they're measuring real performance, but valid in the sense that they're realistic, and that's again often a challenge with these things. People don't do it appropriately. We'll talk about metrics again in a little while. And in large organizations, again, they treat it as this, well, I've got this administrative thing to do, let me just get it done, and it's not really tied to the performance of what really matters to us, what really matters to me, the manager, to you, the employee. It really is just sort of this administrative empty exercise that I have to do, and you want to be sure that that's not the way you look at it and the way you treat it. We talked a little bit about goals before. I'll talk a little more about the theory of it later on also. But understand what's the point of the why are they important? When we say goals, let people, make people happier and achieve more. That happiness can actually be measured. And it is measured now. When we first sort of theorized, or when people theorized about this, well, actually initially probably 100 years ago, but even some of the more modern research on this, they didn't have available the kind of data we have now that it actually creates that performing your goals successfully, achieving your goals successfully, actually creates a neurochemical response. I made sure, I thought I made that word up, but it is a real word, a neurochemical response. So I know the term dopamine is something you've probably heard of, which is sort of almost a natural opiate that your brain forms. Those are more present when goals are achieved successfully. They do provide focus. We'll talk about the specifics of it, what you want them to be. Goals increase commitment. They increase commitment, especially when people are able to buy into them when they're being created and are able to help assert the goals for the organization as an organization rather than as sort of a top-down individual goal setting, but that also can be very successful if it's done again with appropriate reasons and metrics. We'll talk about the two types of goals only very generally because performance goals, easy enough, that they're often overemphasized because sometimes they say, well, you needed to do this and you didn't do it, or it's important that you get this thing done, and you understand why it's important, and we can measure it. But maybe, just maybe, that person, as I mentioned in the last instance, doesn't have the ability to achieve that goal. So learning goals are really almost primary, because it's very easy to say to somebody, look, you got to work harder because we got to reach this goal. But working harder is not sufficient if you don't know what you're doing, or if you don't have a good plan. But we'll talk about the plans very soon. But so that's really an important sort of a sidebar almost. That it's not just work harder. It's have the skills, have the self-efficacy, which grows out of developing skills largely to achieve those goals. So we're going to look at step one okay, this is basically the same sort of goal setting process, but you set the goals. But we're going to talk about the goals specifically now. What you want. What are the ingredients of successful goals? Okay, and the acronym we use, I should have put the word there because it's going to help you a lot, is SMART, S-M-A-R-T. Okay, and that acronym, if this is an exam question, it's going to be really easy because if I say which one of these doesn't belong, I'm going to put something that really doesn't belong. All right, so what SMART means is specific, not just vague, do your best goals. Specific, measurable, okay, so you know when you've achieved it. Attainable, because if you make it unattainable, then it's going to be very unmotivating. Result-oriented. All right, and ultimately that is obviously why we're there, and time-oriented and timed, because they have to be achieved in a certain amount of time. Now you have this in your book. I'll mention that again: specific, measurable, attainable, result-oriented, and time-oriented or timed. And you have to gain the kind of commitment to it by making them relevant, by making them obtainable, by making them fair. Now, again, if I ask you, is this one of the, SMART stands for, and then I include a word that's wrong, it's going to be really wrong. It's going to be the opposite of one of the words that, for example, you know what tacit means? Tacit means implicit, implied. So this says the first one is specific. If I said, SMART, and then I had 5 words there, and one of them was tacit, well, tacit is the opposite of specific, okay? I wouldn't put something there that was, I wouldn't put like, tough, because tough means, almost, I mean, they can be tough, but they even though that's not one of those 5, it could be put in there. Tacit, is really the opposite of one of those. So that's really, I do that to, again. So make sure that each person has the necessary skills to achieve the goal, and again, improving that. These are all associated with things that we've talked about before. That's really expectancy, okay? The making sure the employee has the skills. That's the self-efficacy aspect of that expectancy part of the EIV model, which we'll mention again. We'll mention all the things from the motivation lesson because this is really motivation put into practice. So all those theories that we talked about before, we're really talking about them in practice here. Perceived self-efficacy, which we talked about. We want to empower employees to grow and understand that they need to have that knowledge of what their results are, because that's really what makes this whole process sort of successful, closes the loop, so to speak. We'll talk for a moment now about again, defining performance. The different types of goals, you use different types of goals for different kinds of jobs, different types of sort of moments in a person's career or in the development even of a single task. So, for example, behavioral goals. Behavioral goals are how do you act with customers and coworkers. Now, that doesn't show up necessarily that day in the bottom line, but it does improve the organization's overall performance, and it does affect it very considerably. So. Understand those what we mean by behavioral goals, how you treat others, and how you interact with, well, mainly with people, but I guess with things as well have to do with your behavioral goals. Objective goals, again, you need clear outcomes. Most jobs have clear out, or the ones that have clear outcomes, then objective goals are the things that you look for. If you're working in public relations, then the behavioral goals, maybe that's really the measure, because the actual outcomes depend on so many other things, so that you can't say, well, you did a really good job of public relations today, so the company made an extra $500,000. It just doesn't work that way, but it does sort of create that kind of an atmosphere and contribute to it. Project goals, again, you can measure them even though you're not measuring them with a specific outcome that the organization achieves. The fact is, you did your part of a project. You did it successfully. You did it well. You did it on time. That's what we really mean by a project goal. Just sort of like what your part of the organization had to the organization's goal had to consisted of. Here's another question for you. When an employee's skills are lacking, it is better to set performance goals first. So you set the goals first, target a specific end result, and then from there set learning goals to allow for the skill to be acquired. Okay. Do you set the performance goals for the employee first, and then the learning goals? The answer is no. Oh, I didn't answer this on here, but the answer is no. I'll go back to it for a second. The answer is false. Okay. You want the person, I was going to say student, you want the person to have those learning goals achieved before you start challenging them with performance goals. Again, the organization has goals, but the individual's goals, generally you want the person to know what they're doing before you start challenging them with goals. Okay, again, specific and time-based. Okay, result-oriented, all those things, aspects of the SMART goals. They're not so smart if the person is not able to achieve them, if has not been given the kind of training that they need to achieve them. This week, again, we talked about this. We didn't talk about. I'm going to go back to here because now we're at that step 2. All right, so this will highlight step 2, provide feedback and coaching on performance results. You want to progress toward the final goal, but you need to be monitored along the way, because you don't just say, well, and I think we had one of our guest speakers actually will talk about a situation where said, well, this is your part of the project. Turn it in on this day because that's when so and so is turning something else in. And this is a major project of a major company. And what happened is one person didn't have his part of the project done. That's a lack of successful feedback, of appropriate feedback, and that manager learned, as many of us do, that sometimes you have to really monitor things along the way and let people know how they're doing vis-a-vis your ultimate or their ultimate work product. And again, you need to monitor those things along the way. There are managers and organizations that monitor and evaluate only final outcomes. In an organization where you've got really the top employees and very sort of established and successful ways of doing things, that can work. Generally speaking, you want to shape outcomes. We talked about shaping. That's what we're saying. You reward people sometimes for what they do along the way, or at least give them that feedback, which can be a reward for what they do along the way, which leads to that completed aspect. Now let's look at as we said, monitoring both progress toward the final goal and the ultimate achievement. When we talk about monitoring, these are the sort of three aspects within that process, within that step, and just collecting information isn't good enough. But collecting information by monitoring is what's going to allow you to determine what has to be done and what's going right, and then you move forward from there to sometimes to expand beyond the individual project, beyond the individual aspect of what the person is doing, for what they could be doing next and what the organization could be doing next. So that's sort of that identify opportunities to enhance performance. That's even beyond just evaluating what, how people are doing and giving them some kind of feedback. When you monitor performance, these are the things you monitor. I don't really have to, I'm not going to read you this slide, but these are the kinds of things that you monitor. And again, you look for ways to improve sometimes, even beyond what it is that you're trying to evaluate, what you're trying to almost, I'd say, count. You look when you're this really gets us to the point of the valid metrics here. If you have an established goal, it's sort of a standard costing. For those of you that are in accounting or have taken managerial cost accounting, you have standard costing measures, and you're not achieving them. This is sort of the very technical aspect of that, or the technical application of that. But it needs to be relevant and active and accurate. That's really what we're talking about. You may have a previously established goal, but things may have changed. And this isn't just where you're holding people to standards that they can't achieve. Sometimes you're holding them to standards that are too easy. If some aspect of the process has been automated, and the costs have gone down. I'm in an organization that it's a huge organization that has, and they're not trying to take credit for doing something they didn't do, but it's a huge organization and has groups within it. The organization has about, this is a professional organization, has about 18,000, maybe 25,000 members, and they're in groups. Some of the groups are as small as probably a few hundred or 1,000, and then other groups are bigger than that. But each group has a newsletter, and for many years those letters were mailed to us. Well, those newsletters are no longer mailed. So when that organization says, or when that subsidiary of the organization says, well, we were able to, we were much more profitable or much more cost effective, because it isn't it is just a professional organization. They don't produce products, but we were much more cost effective. They specifically noted, because it is business school professors, that the reason we were so much more effective was because we weren't spending, $15 on each member each year to mail out this newsletter, because obviously they were emailing it at some point in the past. So that, again, you need valid metrics. Often it's because, if the price of gas got higher, or the price of some component got higher, or the price of hiring certain kinds of employees. Sometimes they need licenses and certifications that they didn't need before. So the price goes up, even though the performance may go up too. But understand, that's all part of your performance part of evaluating performance, and you really do have to, again, you're a manager, you're smart, You're all people that have been trained. Those are the kinds of things that you have to look for, things perhaps that nobody else has thought of. Now, what kinds of things go wrong? What do we mean when we talk about the various perceptual errors? When you are, now we are talking about evaluating people also. When you monitor them, you're making certain interpretations, and that's a form of evaluation. So these kinds of effects, and I'm not going to go over them in any great detail because the book does, but except for strictness, which, well, I'm not going to go over that in detail, but it's one that I certainly wanted to make sure that was included. The halo effect, you know now what the halo effect is. You can see how it could work. If you're evaluating an employee that does something else really great and you sort of just apply that across the board. It could be a person that always comes in on time but isn't really achieving anything. You notice that they come in early all the time. You just think that they're effective workers. You do have to look at those specific performance measures and understand that that isn't the whole story, and it can, in some cases, be misleading. A recency effect, I'll tell you about recency, and the other side of the recency effect is the primacy effect, which, maybe if you're interviewing people, that comes in very, very often, but primacy effect is overemphasizing something that came first. So if you looked at a lot of different things and a lot of different ways to do something, the one you came first was the one that you measured the other ones against. It's associated with a contrast effect. But so that primacy effect is that. The recency effect is you remember what they did most recently. If you have an employee and you're doing a performance evaluation, I had a colleague of mine. One of his employees had to do something for me every. I guess it was. Well, almost every day there was something that had to get set up. It was in an old IT environment, something that had to get set up and logged accurately. And it was a clerical job, but it required a good deal of skill. And this was a person who was quite good at it. And one day, she gave me the wrong data, essentially, which is what happened. And I said, look, so and so, gave me the wrong data here, and I just wanted you to know, so because this is a person that did the job really well. All the time. I mean, I would say just about all the time, but I swear it was really all the time, except for this one time. And he said, oh, that's too bad because I'm doing her performance evaluation next week. And I'm thinking, and this guy was a friend of mine, and I didn't say it this way. I'm thinking, how stupid is that? What difference does it make that you're doing her performance evaluation next week? This doesn't have to be included. This is, she's near perfect at this part of her job. It's demanding, it's challenging, and I just told him because that's he needed to know. But this was not this was a person that was very, very competent at her job, and I was a little surprised at him for mentioning it that way. But that recency effect is normally something that you don't notice, but you compare things to you remember the recent events more, and you say, well, this person's really great because they had a really great summer quarter, and that's not. In your own evaluations of things, if you're a sports fan, you may remember an athlete's really great performance in the last few games, and you say, boy, this guy's a Hall of Famer, or in a restaurant, you go somewhere and you say, well, this is, and I know people that have gone to a restaurant and one time they have something that they don't particularly like, and then they just won't go back there again. All right, that's recency effect going the other way. Leniency, central tendency, and strictness are just what they sound like when you narrow the scope. If you're supposed to be evaluating somebody on a scale, you've got a scale of 1 to 7. If you only use 5, 6, and 7, that's a leniency error. If you only use 3, 4, and 5, that's a central tendency error. And obviously strictness error would be only using the lower part of the scale. So those are one kinds of, and then there are other kinds of errors too that are, well, there's obviously there is bias. And specific kinds of bias we talked about when we talked about diversity. That is really almost a legal issue, and we're looking more at bias against sometimes people in a certain field, people that that you may think that I knew somebody who was a teacher and was always saying, well, the people that teach the next grade up, they don't do anything. Their job is easy. We do all the hard work now. Somebody that taught primary school. That's the kind of thing, that's the kind of bias that we're talking about that's not, sort of a legal issue. That's just, well, again, a personal bias. And how do you overcome bias that people might have against the person that they're evaluating? Well, a way to do that is with the 360 feedback system. A 360 feedback system gets feedback not just from the manager but from everybody else that interacts with, or many other people that interact with the employee. You can probably guess when you're getting feedback from subordinates and from peers, especially from subordinates and peers, there are lots of opportunities for error and separate bias, which may cancel each other out. Because if you've got a lot of employees, then you'll probably be get a broader spectrum of a broader range of opinion. But does the employee know that he or she is going to be identified by a comment? All right, that's a problem. If somebody has 2 employees or 2 subordinates, it's a little hard to do that because they're going to know just where it came from. It's supposed to be unidentified, anonymous. There could be consequences, and again, it just could contaminate the whole process. So there is the element of error there. But if somebody's got 20 or 30 employees and all they're doing is a scale, and you're getting means and not extremes, that can be useful feedback, especially when you're comparing subordinates across a large organization. It can be useful. Peers, well. If you're getting evaluated by your peers, a lot of them may be competing for you for promotions. If that's the case, then again that would sort of contaminate the data as well. So there are some things that you need to know and you need to be careful about when it comes to the looking at 360 evaluation, but it really, or 360-degree feedback. But it really can be a very helpful tool for evaluating employees. And we'll ask another question here. This is a pretty easy one. I don't even know why I put such an easy question here. But Janice is evaluating the employees in her department. She does not want to hurt anyone's feelings and decides to rate all her employees high on all performance dimensions. What error is Janice making? Well, is it a halo error? Well, I'm not going to read this to you because you probably know. And if you don't, then you do now. Okay? It is leniency. Again, those sort of limited or narrowed scope errors, those last 3 on the last page, those are ones that you shouldn't have to spend any time learning them. Those should make automatic sense to you. Contrast effects, which I didn't talk about specifically, I just referred to it in the context of primacy. That's where the something that you look at when you're looking at something, you're only comparing it to the last person or the last evaluee or the last item that you're evaluating. So you're, or I shouldn't say the last, but one specific one that stands out. Often it stands out because it was primary, but it may stand out for other reasons as well. But again, that is a threat to the validity of your or the reliability of your decisions and your ratings. That was step 1 and step 2, and now we're moving on to feedback, which we've talked about at some length already, but we're going to give a little bit of detail about it here. Why is it important? Most people don't take it as well as they might. I think they tie it to lots of negative things, but and that's why it's sort of underutilized in a lot of areas. But well, they say that in the slide. But a lot of people they agree that it can boost your performance, but in actual practice, they're a little bit uncomfortable with it. Some of them are uncomfortable giving it, some are uncomfortable getting it, and some of us, some of you, some of anybody, just the whole process can be very discomforting. And we'll define it first a little bit, but you obviously know that it's not an evaluation. We don't mean it as an evaluation, all right? It's closely associated with goal setting, but we don't mean it as an evaluative thing. If you say that these are the projects you've completed, or the number of defective items that you've produced, or the number of customs that you've acquired that you've brought on. Those are kind of feedback. All right, that's what we're talking about as positive, even when it's not approving. but positive, useful kinds of feedback. Saying that you have a bad attitude is not feedback. That is evaluating somebody, attributing certain, to some extent, some kind of motive to their behavior. That's not what we mean by useful feedback. Saying you're lazy, those are all the kinds of things that you want to avoid. You want to use feedback for a function. You want to use it so that it serves a purpose, and the two purposes we're talking about are instructional and motivational. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time defining these words, but if it teaches you new behavior, then it's instructional, and if it's associated with rewards, then we call it motivational. But those are really, this is not something, I wouldn't ask a question on this, because I think it's just too obvious, and I'm sure you know it. And we know where feedback comes from. And we'll sort of focus on the last two things here. We've talked about the first ones mostly. But let's look at many tasks, what we say, but provide a steady stream of feedback. You know how well you're doing because it's there. I mean, somebody that's an artist, or a sculptor, can see is getting feedback because they're producing something that really takes shape in front of them, and that's really meaningful to them, and useful. Some tasks, and again, you get feedback from yourself, and I won't. Well, the slide says it's there. Self-serving bias. We're going to mention it again. It can be a problem because you say, well, boy, I am so good. I have a friend who's a hairdresser. She's very successful, has a lot of very affluent clients, and I've been there when she was working, and she'll just say, God, I'm so good, and well, the fact is she is. So, needless to say, she couldn't do anything for me. But the fact is she is, and it's still funny to hear. But I heard you laughing. The role of senior managers, we'll discuss just, do you want to give feedback to a senior manager? Do you want to? I find myself very often in a position where I want to give feedback to somebody who is high up in an organization, and unless they're paying you for it and asking you for it, it's not something that they really necessarily are used to hearing. They probably do want to hear it on some level. It's really hard to evaluate what a senior manager is doing. You really don't know. You can, if you're an operating employee producing something, you can have outcomes every day that measure your success. If you're a senior manager, how can somebody come in from the outside, or even often somebody on the inside, say, well, gee, that was this manager made really good inroads toward or really good movement toward a much better strategic plan for us today. Well, no, you have no idea. Or even this year, it's really hard to. Their activities are very abstract, and it's really hard to do that. They can encourage feedback by being open. I did have I knew somebody who was my boss, who couldn't take any kind of criticism. I'd say something to him, look, this, I'm not so sure this was really a great decision, and he would get so angry and so defensive. It was like, I sort of vowed to myself, I think I'm like never going to talk to this guy again unless I absolutely have to. And he didn't have that many people working for him, maybe 40. So, I couldn't avoid him. But I certainly avoided, criticizing him, and he eventually ended up with a very unsuccessful tenure in that job. And I'm sure a lot of it was because people were afraid to tell him when he was doing something wrong, or when they did, he didn't take their advice, which was probably more of the problem. But there was also this that aspect of not being able to take feedback. But you, as a successful person, probably will, regardless of the source, be willing to take the feedback often enough when it's necessary. Another place where you can get feedback, and the book talks about this a lot. I wasn't that attuned to it before. I don't recall doing that many exit interviews of people who left in my own experience, of people who left for reasons that, a lot of them just, they got a better job. There were things they liked better, and they had things to say that were useful for me, but I I think an angry employee can probably give you the best feedback, but you do have to have to take it with a, you have to attenuate it a little bit for that reason, because you say, well, if the employee's angry and you don't agree with the reason that the employee got angry at the organization, or you are the reason that the employee got angry at the organization, it's going to be hard to take that feedback usefully. But it can be very, very valuable. And once I sort of thought about this more after reading it in the book, there have been some examples I know of other people, and to a lesser extent in my own career, hearing that about people, and at least one case where on my way out I think I gave some very useful advice to somebody. That was because I think I suspected somebody in the organization of doing something dishonest, which it turns out that person was. So that I don't know if that helped them catch the person, or helped them address the situation, but it was successful in that regard, in that narrow regard. The perception and negative feedback. We've kind of talked about this. A negative message. I mean, if you're giving feedback, there's going to be negative feedback, and the way to do it is to do it not just gently, but sort of impersonally. Not to say, well, you should really figure out how to do this. Rather to say, well, maybe what we need to do is train the people better so that we can avoid this kind of thing in the future. Rather than saying, you screwed up, and very often it is the system. Lots of research, and we'll talk later on about Deming's 14 points, but a lot. It's more than that. I forgot how many. But we'll talk about total quality management, and when we do, his research showed that 85% of the mistakes of the problems in organizations are caused by the systems rather than by individuals. So we will. That's really the way to bring it up and the way to treat it. And giving negative feedback can reduce people's self-efficacy as well, which is even more of a problem. So it is very important for us to bear that kind of stuff in mind. Okay, I can think of a case in my own life where I got negative feedback on something that I had done that I felt was unfounded, and I really sort of, it really affected my opinion of that organization. I hadn't been there for very long at the time, and it affected my opinion of the organization. And throughout my tenure there, I was probably there for 5 years, and working for the same person who had, I thought, misbehaved in giving me feedback, and it always affected the fact that he was still working there 5 years later, and at that point I had moved up a little bit, and I was almost co-equal to him. Now that was really a very unpleasantly noticeable kind of experience for me, and probably for him too. Okay, so let's just to sum up a little bit also. When people have negative reactions to feedback, or negative perceptions about feedback, these are all things that we've talked about. I'm not going to, fairness of the system is equity we talked about. When we talked about attribution, you understand why those things affect feedback. We probably used that as an example when we talked about self-serving bias and fundamental attribution bias. We used specifically the example of feedback, so that's really where where this sort of comes into play. The credibility of the sources. We've talked about getting feedback from peers and supervisors. Supervisor might be trying to avoid responsibility, him or herself. The conflicting priorities. They might say, well, this is something that I didn't want done anyway, so I don't like the way you're doing it. Well, that's not really a criticism of me or what I've done. So again, those can negatively affect feedback. Of course, some of these things can affect it positively. I mean, the reasonableness of goals and standards, well, if they are reasonable, then it affects it positively. If they aren't reasonable, then obviously it can affect them negatively. And that SMART and reasonableness kind of go together also. Without reasonableness, it doesn't really matter if they're specific and measurable, okay, so that, et cetera. the fairness I mentioned, the equity, whether you feel that whether the system is giving you the kind of credit or reward that you deserve for what you're doing there relative to what other people get. That's what we mean, again, by equity. Performance reward expectancies, when we talked about EIV, that's what we were talking about. You really need to know EIV. You really need to know expectancy, instrumentality, and valence. Okay, that is absolutely crucial to the understanding of a lot of what we do later on. I mean, all those theories about motivation, and many of them we've talked about already today, all those theories of motivation are useful and have application in the workplace. EIV is the one that I'm able to see the most and gave you the most examples of. So, it is something that you absolutely need to know cold. The accuracy, again, having a good information system, one that tracks your production of what you're doing throughout a process. That's also a key to successful feedback and coaching, which obviously is sort of a broader thing. The way you give feedback is sometimes as important as the feedback itself. The book has a list of do's and don'ts. This is kind of related to that. Making it specific and not overly complex is really a sort of a thing that we haven't mentioned already. The other things we have mentioned, and we won't go into further at this point. We'll talk just for a moment. So, well, this is right out of the book. Coaching as a customized process. Again, two people involved in the coaching process, and how you make it successful really depends on that relationship. Coaching is different from mentoring. We'll talk about that a little bit. But coaching is something that you do with your employees, or that your supervisor or manager will do with you. And mentoring is a broader term. But mentoring doesn't necessarily come. In fact, often doesn't come from your immediate supervisor or somebody in your immediate chain of command. It's somebody that's sort of helping you with in a much broader, almost a lifestyle way very often. Even though great coaches are also often great mentors, and vice versa, there is a difference in the definition, which is basically what I just said. Coaching, you coach your own employees generally, where you can mentor anybody. But the actual skills and interactions that go on between you can be almost indistinguishable from each other. Michael wants to make sure the feedback he provides to his employees is perceived correctly. Michael should do all the following except: A, be aware of the fundamental attribution error and try not to commit it. B, provide feedback that concerns the employee's personal life. C, make sure the system is perceived as fair. D, make sure goals established are challenging and attainable. And E, deliver feedback as close as possible to when the behavior was performed. I don't know why I read that to you. But you answered it correctly, I hope. Personal life, that's not part of the feedback process, and doesn't need to be part of the feedback process. Okay, so we can leave that out. Now the fourth step, that last step, is the rewards. Like, what exactly do you provide for your employees in the way of rewards? We talk about extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. We're talking about extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. We talked about this before. Understand that the intrinsic rewards tend to be the ones that will sustain you longer over time. But extrinsic rewards are will sustain you longer in as far as really being committed to what you're doing. You'll continue doing what you have to do if you're getting financial rewards. But if something falls off in those rewards, we will talk again in a moment a little more about the whole reward system based on sort of behavioral kinds of rewards, but stimulus response kinds of rewards. But we're not going to these personal rewards that you get from your own values are the ones that tend to persist. If you work mainly to reward, just to get money or praise, then that's extrinsic, and getting pleasure from the task itself is really what makes our jobs worthwhile as we progress in our careers. And I know that money plays a hugely important role early in someone's career. As you've become more established, or if you're lucky enough to become more established in a career, you'll see how so many other things are going to matter. Mastery, autonomy, and purpose are going to be associated with all of those. But just the way you feel. We talked about, we did the job characteristics model. All right, that is an example of all these things that you can get from a job, largely or leading often to intrinsic rewards. I'm sorry if I took so long to say that. How you distribute them, again, based on results. Pure results, almost using your accounting system, sales, profit, error rate. These are, may include customer satisfaction. You've got measures of that we use to evaluate employees and to reward employees. But those are kind of the obvious ones. Behavior and actions. If you've been cooperative, if you cooperate with other workers, that the OCBs is certainly associated with that. Risk taking. Creativity. Somebody takes a risk and fails. What are you going to do? Are you going to reward that person, or are you going to withdraw rewards or even punish that person? Very interesting concept, because sometimes you really want people to persist in doing the things that they did, even if it didn't work out that time, and you want to reward that kind of behavior even when, as I said, you don't achieve actual financial results from it. Because you figure the next time if somebody takes risks and what seem to be sound risks over and over again, very common in certainly in technology fields and any kind of dynamic enterprise, you're gonna be rewarding that kind of thing. The non-performance considerations, much less sources of rewards now than they were in the past. Things like longevity with the organization, your rank in the organization. Just as sometimes they'll give you rewards based on equity with other people, but usually related to those kinds of, when we talk about non-performance considerations, we're talking about, again, if it's based on results, we'll call it result-oriented. If it's based on just equity because other people are making more, and you're just as, and you're performing at a comparable level, then you may get an increased reward based on that. The outcomes of a reward system, again, the whole idea is just to get more of what you're intending, and again, occasionally there are undesirable effects. They motivate the wrong behavior. It's possible to motivate the wrong behavior through an outcome system, through a reward system that specifically, not intentionally, but that specifically rewards behavior that is not productive in the organization. That does happen. More commonly, I think what happens is a system that seems to be inequitable will be demotivating for people, and the people that are not getting what they what they think they deserve are going to become less perform. They do what we call self-limiting behaviors. They'll intentionally perform less. That can happen. Sometimes people will perform higher, because they say, well, I want them to notice how good I am, and then I'll get my reward. But again, that's a desired outcome. That's actually an interestingly desirable outcome of an inequitable system. You'll find generally these. I'm pointing to the slides that I have over there, but you'll find generally that an inequitable system will often become demotivating, which is obviously a real problem. We'll talk about some of these kinds of rewards and the total rewards, because you really, when you have a job, you say, well, we're going to pay you, $40 or $70 or $80,000 or $300,000 a year, whatever they're paying, whatever somebody's getting paid. That's not your whole compensation. Your whole compensation includes a lot of other things, and I've talked about sort of those non-monetary things, which are largely at the bottom here, but those tend to be reflected in wealth over time. But specifically the things like merit pay and benefits. Benefits make an enormous difference. I know several people, some of them at or near retirement age, some of them way, way younger than that have jobs that they keep really mainly because they get health benefits. You know, I know somebody that works at a job that I would say she has a business that's fairly successful, but she works at another job. Actually, she works as a paramedic, but that's her other job. She is trained at it, but she has another business that's her real passion. But she keeps the paramedic job. She works overnight, a couple of nights a week, just because of those benefits, mainly the health benefits. Now that might be an isolated example, but there are enough of them. And I think I used to be an EMT, so I know a lot of people in that area, and they work for sort of a whole variety of motives. Types of pay for performance. We'll be talking about them again, the differences between merit pay and bonuses and profit sharing, incentive and variable pay. These are all described in the text, and we'll talk about them again, in fact, over time. So, I think you'll see that the different systems of pay for performance can really affect. They need to be tailored to the type of work that you're doing, and they really can affect performance. So, for example, you're not going to pay a piecework for somebody that's a piano teacher or even generally a computer skills teacher. Where does incentives come? Where do these incentives come from? We'll talk about that again at length, actually later in the term. But to understand when we talk about later about group compensation also, and how you compensate a group. Well, you need, the successful side of that is usually people are getting compensated for their individual success, for their group success, and then often for the organization's success as well, so that they're really pulled together. Those are we're gonna change the subject now, move off that specific aspects of performance, overall performance process, and we're going to move on to talking about the contingent consequences. Now, you've already learned this in your course. You've taken a psychology course generally, and you've talked about a lot of these terms, positive and negative reinforcement. So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but I am going to give a few examples of some of these things, and we'll begin just by talking in general. Okay, you can improve behavior. This is something right out of Thorndike or any of the earlier behaviorists, and right up to the modern ones. That favorable consequences create repeat a likelihood of repeating a behavior. This is something that you need to understand, and I'll be giving you other examples of these, perhaps actually video examples of some of these later on. But what are some of the things that you do to have to reinforce positive reinforcement? Sometimes it's saying nice things. Sometimes it's giving somebody money. Sometimes it's giving somebody time off. You might call time off. If you hate your job, time off would be almost negative reinforcement. We're not really looking at it that way. We're looking at it as a one-time reward. If there is the difference between negative reinforcement and punishment is something that you need to know. Okay, understand that if negative reinforcement is withdrawing a bad consequence. So, for example, if somebody has has to work in an area where there's a lot of noise, and you do something to move them and you put them in an area where there's less noise, to remove the noise. Okay, that's something that you can do. There are lots of other examples of negative reinforcement, but something displeasing, because so many of us try to remove the displeasing aspects of work before somebody starts working there. It really is a very personal thing. What are the things that you don't like about your job? It's good to know that about people. It's good to study that about people so that you can offer something to them. That maybe they have to work Sundays and they don't like that, or maybe they have to work Wednesdays and they don't like that. I mean, depending on the individual, it could be almost anything. But those are the kinds of things that if you know your employees, you can address those things. Extinction is what we mean by withdrawing all consequence. There is no consequence at all. If somebody's saying off-color jokes in mixed company in in any organization, or even sort of jokes that are considered really unacceptable kinds of humor. Naturally, I would use that as an example. Somebody's using unacceptable kinds of humor, unacceptable kinds of behavior. You may just sort of ignore that person, and people may in general ignore that person, not laugh at, not respond to them at all. That's another example of that. We'll talk about reinforcement schedules here too, and I'll be sending you something on this as well. It isn't just the reinforcement; it's how you time it and how you carry it out. And a continuous reinforcement, if you reinforce every instance of the target behavior, what happens? Well, they'll do it. They'll keep doing it, but as soon as you withdraw that reward, as soon as you stop giving them money for a tip for good service, or as soon as you stop giving somebody some kind of reinforcing comment for doing their job well, as soon as you stop doing that, there's less likelihood that they will continue that behavior. Intermittent reinforcement is more resistant, to extinction. So when you stop doing it, it takes longer for somebody to realize or for somebody to react to it that way. So I'm going to talk to you much more about that stuff later on as well. When we talk about training and development and a couple of other aspects, we'll give some more examples of that, because these different types of reinforcement and including fixed ratio. And fixed interval, variable ratio, and variable interval, we'll be talking about in a separate session. And I do want you to know that and know the examples of that as well. So thank you. I hope this is useful. Please do call me if you have any questions about this. And we're out.